Okay.
Heavenly Father, Yahuwah Elhi, we just thank you and praise you for blessing us with this day. Abba, we just thank you for opening our eyes and our ears and calling us so that we can hear your words being spoken today. Abba, please bless everybody that receives the message, and may it be an eye-opening experience to our hearts. Abba, thank you so much for keeping your hands upon us and for showing us each and every way that you have prepared for us through your instructions. Abba, we just thank you for all that you are and all that you do. In your precious name, we ask these things. Amen.
Amen. So here it is, December 17th of 2023, and I was going to continue a little bit from last week. I mentioned at the tail end of last week's talk about this song titled "O Little Town of Bethlehem," and the idea of even mentioning something having to do with this celebration season in the common culture, which is common, I'd say, for Greco-Roman, Western. I don't know if people in the Orient necessarily. As a matter of fact, there was a guy that I know that was in China a few years ago, and he was teaching English. A bunch of Chinese students, and one of his objectives was to teach American culture as well as the language, because the two are tied together in a big way. And he put a question up on the internet. He said, "Do you think I should tell them about Christmas?" I mean, that's a big deal about a culture in terms of commerce, economy, as well as just the whole mentality and kind of the crescendo of the year and that whole thing. Well, it was a real question. It's like, should you tell those people? Should they have some sort of regard, or to be better not to tell them? And it's like, wait a minute, if you're telling them about the culture, isn't that tied together? And so it becomes this real issue. So for Yahuwah to say, do not, he's Yahweh talking to Israel, his people, and he says, do not learn, study, determine the ritual, custom, celebration, means of worshiping false gods, Elohim Achrim, and then do it like you're worshiping me. In fact, don't even let the names of these other gods come out of your mouth. Well, the word name is Shem, Shin Mem. And the word Shem, as we've discussed before, doesn't just mean how do you pronounce that person's name, like Eric, or like, is it Yahweh, or is it Yahweh, or Yahweh, or Yahuwah? It's not necessarily, may include, but it's not necessarily about the phonetic pronunciation of those four letters. But the word Shem also means fame, renown, reputation, and the occupation of all your concerns. In other words, it's the stuff you are about, the stuff that interests you, the stuff that you put your mind to if you can. If you are on a task of a job and you got to pay attention, you're mowing the lawn and you got to make sure you don't run over the guy's sprinklers, you got to pay attention to the lawn you're mowing. Or if you're driving, but if you're daydreaming, it's like, where do you go when you're allowed to just go to think about whatever you want to think about? That's basically your Shem. So to talk about what is America, what is the American culture of the 20th century, 21st century? And if you're hired by somebody to go teach that to a bunch of students so they understand their, America and China are not necessarily enemies. They appear to be, they're presented, but on the other hand, economically, they're allies. And in the 1930s, China was very closely associated to the United States, and they had a mutual adversary in the Pacific theater of war. And that changes. The book 1984 was written, George Orwell. Future hypothetical political scenario on the world is that there's basically 3 nation groups, just 3. And 2 were always opposed and 2 were always allied. But things would change, and so it was somebody's job to change history and to go back and say, oh, we've always been this other country's friend, and we've always been this person's adversary. They're always really horrible people. Back in the 1970s, Iran, the country over there in the Middle East, otherwise known as Persia, was Israel's greatest friend and America's greatest friend. Now they're the greatest enemy, and it's like, did the people's attitude change? Is it religious? Is it political? And at any moment, in my estimation, the people, the populace, the people that are listening to the news reports are being yanked around this way and that way. And we're given hysterical, what some might call fear-mongering, where somebody's interest, somebody else's interest, an unnamed unknown, has a benefit if the general population is discombobulated, ill at ease, panicked, stressed, maybe even afraid, left not knowing what's what. There's some advantage to them. Now, for me to try to identify what that advantage is or how that works is going to be all in my imagination. I don't have the facts. As a matter of fact, I was saying to somebody once a few years ago that, this particular political leader has done a bunch of bad stuff. And they said, what has he done? And all of a sudden I realized I have no idea. All I know is what I've heard. And they've heard other things. And I've realized I should just shut up. I can have an inclination of favor or disregard, but all I know is a product of what information I've been fed. And I have absolutely no way to prove whether that information is true. And this other person I was talking to, this friend, she had a lot of affection for this particular political leader. And I might say, how can you think that? She has other information, or she chooses to believe other information. And so when it comes down to celebrating culture, or celebrating a time of year, or celebrating a pretend phantom ideology, who's the, shall we call it ethics police? Is there some authority that says, you're not allowed to appreciate that, you're not allowed to think that? It's like, what did Yahuwah say to his people? He said, I don't have the verse in front of me, but he said, don't learn the ceremonial, ritual, celebratory, the practices of how the neighbors who worship Elohim Akrim, who don't know Yahweh, do not learn the way they worship their deities and do it like you're worshiping me. Don't do that. Well, maybe we're not doing that, so maybe it's okay. I remember when I was a kid, got a book saying, hey, this is the history of where the celebration of this December occasion comes about. The whole red and green and the figure and all the stories and the songs and the traditions. Where did it all come from? And a lot of it was developed in the 1930s. And even that one, what we now call a classic figure, was an artist was hired by Coca-Cola to have this guy drinking a Coke, and it's like, well, that became the go-to symbol, because a few years before it was drawn completely different, and Europe was different, and it was named after some saint, and it was this, maybe he did this, maybe he did that, and it's like, where does all this stuff come from? And you go to other countries and they all have different spins on the stories. And it's like, and I just remembered I didn't make much of an issue of it when I was really young, but there was little bits of trickling in information. And it wasn't until I started looking closer at the Torah. Well, not just the Torah, but the Tanakh. The Tanakh, again, is the phonetics TNK, which is an acronym standing for Torah, which is the instructions, the first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And you might say, come on, we don't need those details. We already know that. You're burning time speaking these words. I know for a fact that there are people, not just little kids, but older people who do not know what the first 5 books of the Bible are. Never seen it, never read it, never opened it up. And that these are strange things. Tanakh, what's that? I remember one time I was talking about that the Almighty's name is Yodevavhe. It's like, how do you pronounce that? Yodevavhe, Yodevavhe. What does that mean, Yodevavhe? I said, no, I'm spelling his name with 4 Hebrew letters, Yod, He, Vav, or Wa, Hey. And they thought that I was saying that his name was, this phonetic soundbite, Yodevavhe, Yodevavhe. It's like, gosh, we don't know how other people hear things. And so I try to be meticulously and simply clear, because if somebody logs into this site to listen and hasn't been listening to a bunch of other stuff, these are all strange foreign words. And how do you allow somebody to go, okay, I can at least track with what they're saying? So for me to say there's this Tanakh, people have never heard of that word. So it's an acronym, TNK, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketubim, which in Hebrew is the words, the instructions, the first 5 books, the prophets, which is Nevi'im, and then Ketub are letters K-T-U-B. Ketub literally means to write. So the writings. Well, what are the writings? Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Well, they're all writings, but those are more literary works. They're not like a specific message given to a prophet like Isaiah or Jeremiah or something like that. When I started looking at that, now, when I was in high school, I went to a Baptist high school and in Los Angeles. We had a Bible class every day. That was one of we had eight classes a day. And that was one of the 8 classes. Every day we took a Bible class. And I've been to probably thousands of sermons that I heard and sung songs and few different denominations and churches and Christian books and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, one day I realized I don't think I ever heard anything written in the Old Testament like it was talking to me. I think I'm now projecting years back, but I think when I was reading the Old Testament, I must have been reading what other people used to believe, or a message that was sent from heaven through the prophet to a different people living on the other side of the world a few thousand years ago. And it was history, and it was, let's just say it was completely accurate. There's no reason not to believe it. But what's that got to do with me? It's ancient history. I don't recall what I was thinking when I read those things. I know I read them. I know I studied the Bible. We learned in Sunday school, a whole bunch of Bible stories, Old Testament and New Testament. Here's the story of David and Goliath. I was talking to a friend a couple of years ago and mentioned something about David and Goliath, or mentioned something about Abraham, and he had no idea what I was talking about. No idea. He'd never looked at Genesis, never cared to. Or Psalms, or maybe they've heard of Psalms 23 or something, but it just doesn't matter because we've got the New Testament. It's like, well, what do you mean it doesn't matter? Well, I was taught that it mattered, but somebody else is taught that it doesn't matter. Or whether they were taught or they just kind of picked it up. What's it matter? Who cares? If Yahuwah says to Israel, don't learn the ritual, ceremonial worship liturgies of some other deity. Like there's a fellow out here on the street who has what I believe are Buddhist prayer flags, and he has them hanging in his garden, just little colored things hanging on a string. And it's like, hey, that's cool. Hey, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should get a string and put up a bunch of Bible verses. That's not a bad idea, but Yahweh said, don't copy the way somebody else worships their God. Now, I don't even know the guy. Is he Buddhist or not? I don't know. Maybe he just thinks it's cool. Maybe it's trendy. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is. But the point is, I can do something else if I want to, but why would I have a propensity? I remember I heard somebody say once, I went up to work on somebody's house, and there was this rock, kind of an oval shaped rock, and it was standing vertical. And it's like, boy, if that thing tipped over, it would break your foot. But it's like, and she said, oh, there's this lady. She said, yeah, she started dating this guy who traces his heritage back to the Vikings, Norse. And they have these standing stones, and it's like laying claim to this lady's affections by having this stone standing up in her front yard. It's like, oh, okay. Hey, that's pretty cool. Maybe I should do something like that. Maybe I should get this rock and stick it in my front yard and carve into it some Paleo Hebrew. Would that be a bad thing to do? Well, I don't think it would be a bad thing to do, but I could do that, I suppose. But what I'm saying is, we can come up with ideas of, oh, that sounds like it'd be fun. Oh, that sounds like it'd be interesting. Oh, that sounds like it does. Yeah, there's something to that. Is that bad? Should we not do those things? I don't know. Discuss it with your friends or pray about it and wonder whether that's okay. Maybe Yahweh will give you a personal message that he would be proud of you for doing that, or that he says, no, I don't want you doing that. That would be kind of an offense to me. It's like, I'm suggesting seriously that you just, before you do something like that, find out what his take on. Remember, David had the idea, hey, I should build a temple. I should build a temple to Yahweh's name. Why did he think that? Well, I would be willing to guess, to bet that there were other temples to other deities scattered all over the world. And David thought, yeah, I should build a temple to Yahweh right here in Jerusalem. And then this message came to David where Yahweh said, why do you think you ought to do that? I didn't give you that idea. He made the heavens and the earth. You think you're going to contain me in a little box, a temple? No way. And he said, again, I don't have the exact verse come to mind, but he said that was never even an intention of his. However, he didn't tell David, don't do it. What he said was, your hands are full of blood. You're a warrior. You're not going to be, but you can put it together and you can design it, but have your son build it, not you. And it's like, so it's not Yahweh's idea, but then we've got this temple in Ezekiel 43, and quite a few chapters actually there in the Ezekiel 40s. And then there was, when the Israelites left Persia under Cyrus and went back to Jerusalem, and they were supposed to build the temple and build the city and build the wall. Instead of building the temple, they were building their own homes and building the wall. And then all of a sudden this message came to them saying, listen, you guys aren't going to prosper until you put your attention towards putting the temple back together first, before you finish even your own homes. And it's like, so now I have to sit there and say, well, if Yahweh didn't care about the temple when he was talking to David, why doesn't he suddenly care about the temple now that he's talking to these guys coming back into the land? And is there supposed to be another temple? And when Herod built the temple and it was so majestic and ornamented, and the disciples said to Yeshua, hey, look at this thing, isn't it grand? And Yeshua said, oh, Jerusalem, I would have taken you under my wing, but you wouldn't have it, and not one stone will be left on another. I mean, he doesn't even seem to care about that stuff. And aren't we supposed to be the temple? Each one of us, and collectively? What does anybody care about a building on a piece of land? Holy ground. It's like holy ground. It's like, that's some fairy tale thing, isn't it? Oh, well, no. Moshe, when he was standing at the burning bush, he sees this bush on fire. There's no holy ground. There's a bush on fire. And he goes and he looks, and it's not being burned. And he says, well, that's a curious sight. He gets a little closer, and all of a sudden this voice is speaking to him and says, take your shoes off because you're on Eretz Kadosh, holy ground. Take your shoes off. So this concept exists, but it's like, where do we get this stuff? And then there's this other verse where Yahweh says, can a man make for himself Elohim? They're not Elohim. What does that mean? Can he make for himself gods? They're not gods. Can a man make for himself holy days? They're not holy. They're not holy days. They're not, you can have a holiday, but what makes something sacred? So we have this picture where Ezekiel sees these angels going around the throne somehow. Somehow there's this picture. And they're saying, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Where we read in English that they say holy, 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 but they're actually saying Kadosh. Kuf Dalet Shin. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. But see, when I first started learning Hebrew, or first heard some Hebrew words in this congregation years ago, the word Kadosh wasn't a pleasant word. It was kind of jarring. It's like, holy, holy, holy. Boy, we used to sing that in church. And the word itself is easy on the ear. It's a beautiful word. Holy, holy, holy. I mean, by singing those words, you almost feel like you're saying something holy. But that's not his word. Kadosh. And even the name Yahweh, when I first heard that, it was like, ugh. Lord God Almighty. The beauty of the English, even if it comes from hearing monks singing Latin, see, our ear becomes attuned, and I then had to intentionally exercise a volitional editing of my psyche to the point where I thought, I've got to train myself to not appreciate those words any longer. And I've got to get an appetite to taste these Hebrew words. There was a book that somebody wrote called Hebrew Honey. Well, maybe some people don't like the taste of that honey. Well, my point is, it was foreign, it was jarring, it was different, it wasn't a pleasant thing. Even the Sabbath day, I found to be a very rude, caustic interruption of my life, my progress. It was horrible. But when I started reading things in the Torah, Deuteronomy 30 especially, bam, it just struck me. Daniel 12, Ezekiel 36. As I attended to what Yahweh said, as I attended more to what Yahweh said, all of a sudden I found the English, the Greek, the American, British, Roman cultural celebrations started losing their appeal. Even listening to Christian songs on the radio, driving and just punching buttons, hearing, going through the channels, trying to stay awake. And so I have had some people say, well, quit listening to that stuff. And it's like, listen, I fall asleep when I drive, and I just got to push the buttons and keep alert so I can be as safe as possible, or put on a tape. And I'm just saying that listening to things, I found that as I listened to Christian radio, Christian sermons, Christian music, you might hear one at first and your rational mind goes, hey, I agree with that, I disagree with that. But then you listen a little more and you go, that's really sweet. That's almost syrupy. That's almost like romantic. Yeah. And you listen to the philosophy, to the teaching, and you go, yeah, what a beautiful thing. And it's almost like what they call the Siren Song, which is written about this man named Odysseus, ancient Greek writer by the name of Homer, a book called the Odyssey. Sailors on the in the ocean, on the open sea, when they'd get near these rocks, they'd hear these female voices singing this beautiful song. They were called sirens. They're almost like mermaids or something. They didn't know what they were, but these women are singing this incredible, beautiful song. And the closer you get to the rocks, the more you can hear it, the different voices. But then the waves would pull you into the rocks and destroy your ship. So the siren song is something beautiful and alluring, but when you get close enough, it all of a sudden will kill you, will possess you. Well, in modern days, they've decided, scientists have determined that actually as the wind blows through the rocks, it sets up this whistling, this sounds like music. And that's what they were hearing, but they didn't know that that's what it was. They thought it was these mermaids or whatever they thought they were singing, these spirits of, or maybe they were actually women that were lounging at the beach singing. Nobody knew, but it would destroyed many ships. I found that as I was reading the Torah, reading the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, which there was no reason to, if I'm studying, New Testament all the time, I found that as I started to get a taste for or get an understanding of what Yahweh said to his people in what we call the Old Testament was different than what I heard in the New Testament, different than the voice in these worship songs and these preachers and various Christian books. And even though the Christian books, if you just read them at surface value, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's poetic, it's wise, it's meaningful, it's heartfelt things to meditate on. But then I started noticing more and more a discrepancy, a disagreement, sometimes absolutely contradictory with what I saw in the Old Testament. And so then I intentionally stopped listening for a while. Okay, I'm not going to read the New Testament for a while. I don't know how long. It became a couple years, but I started only reading the Old Testament. And especially if you go through what they call the weekly parashah readings, you might hear this word parashah, PRSH. Well, that's the same as PRS, which is Persia, which is parsing, like mini tickle u farsing, parse. To parse, where we get the word parsnip, is a vegetable that you take a root and you cut it up into pieces. So the parashah is cut up readings for each week. Well, the chapters are parashahs also, but chapters or verses where they cut up sentences or paragraphs into verses. Just so you know, the parashah is what the Jews typically have agreed to around the world, all read the same passage every week, every year. And then they have what they call the triennial cycle, where instead of reading through the whole Torah in 1 year, the triennial is they read through the Torah in 3 years, so they go slower. They still read parashah, but they're spread out so you can linger longer for each passage for 3 weeks instead of 1 week, you might say. But the idea is for everybody to be reading the same thing. And every year, if you go over the Torah, how many times did I read the Torah when I was going to the Baptist high school? I don't know. I know we did at least once, because I think we went through the whole Bible, and it's like, okay, your job this week is to read this book, the book of Zechariah or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I read it. Okay, did my homework. It's like, but did you listen to its voice? I don't know. I remember I was in a home church for a while, and I was teaching there, and I decided to go through the books of the New Testament, like the small books that you never pay any attention to. Philemon. What's the book of Philemon about? I don't, it's seldom quoted, but it's there for a reason. What's the essence of the book of Philemon or Titus? I'd have to go back and look. I mean, a lot of people quote from Hebrews and Romans and Corinthians, but it's like, what about these other books? My point is, what you put your attention to especially if you stop listening to the other voices for a while, then you can start to hear. And as I started, for 3 years, I went through the parashah of the Torah. And then I thought, man, I'm not getting any other readings in with the Psalms or the Proverbs. For a while, when I was younger, I was reading Proverbs all the time. But what I'm saying is, I noticed if I read the parashah every week, I wasn't reading Isaiah and Jeremiah and the Psalms and the. So I thought, okay, well, depending on how much time you have, I'm going to stop doing the parashah reading and now attend to just these other things. And what I'm saying is, are you being led by the Ruach to do that? But as you focus your attention and say, I'm going to choose to believe that he's not just talking to some people group on the other side of the world 2, 3, 4,000 years ago, but this is to me now, present tense. How can that be? He's talking about, you guys better straighten up or else the Assyrians are going to come in and attack you, or you're going to be taken into captivity by the Persians or the Egyptians or it's ancient history. What's the heart of the message? And if I take the heart of the message as if Yahuwah was expressing his heart real time to his people, real time present tense, it's the same heart. And that whatever complaint he had about his people back then would be the same type of complaint he would have about his people today. Because it's the same thing that bugs him or that he disapproves of. Or if there's something about what his people are doing that pleases him, it should be the same thing as today. And when I took on that frame of mind, all I can say in retrospect is I don't know when the change happened, but all of a sudden I started seeing things differently. And then it was years after that I started learning the Hebrew. And there was one lady at the Torah study who knew some Hebrew, and she got these like children's books for learning Hebrew, but the problem is you open it up and it's all written in Hebrew. And it's like, unless you have a teacher reading saying, okay, now pronounce these words. It's like, I don't know how to pronounce these words, so I can't use this book on my own. And it was like, what am I supposed to do with this? Well, now there's online stuff, which there wasn't back then. And now you can take classes like that. But the point is, unless you knew somebody that knew Hebrew, you can't read these books. And so a friend of mine got the Tanakh, and he found a dictionary by Reuben Alkalay, which was a pretty good dictionary, 5-volume set, Hebrew, English, English, Hebrew. But then he found Klein's, and when I found Klein's, it was like, whoa, that's the dictionary, man. That's the one that I found to be incredibly useful. But I didn't even know how to read Hebrew when I got Klein's and when I got the Tanakh. So that had to be a personal effort on my part to say, I got to learn this alphabet. I got to learn, what are these letters? What are they? And I didn't even know what do the letters mean. The only reason I started looking at what do the letters mean is because in 2004, I found this thing that I call the Mishkan pattern. And then in 2005, I noticed that the pattern that I found, the Mishkan pattern, having nothing to do with the Hebrew language. All of a sudden in 2005, I looked at the Hebrew alphabet, the back of Lou White's book called Fossilized Customs, and it's like, hey, look at the meanings of the letters from this ancient paleo thing. Aleph is an ox, Bet is a house, Gimel is a camel. Even at that simple pictorial level, I can see the Mishkan pattern in there. And that was a mind blower because I'd never heard anybody talk about the Mishkan pattern. The Mishkan pattern is basically the staging of the 7 days of creation in Genesis 1, the list of Moedim in Leviticus 23, and the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in Exodus 25. Those three places are all perfect fit. Look like two different lists, but you put the list together and thematically they're identical. And then I could overlay also the Beatitudes of Matthew 5. There's 4 things. And then I found 50 places, then 70 places, then I've found over 500, stop counting, where that pattern, I can see that pattern, and I realize that pattern is Yahweh's signature. He determined what to do and how many days to do it in. 7 days, and this is the things he was going to do. Why? I don't know why. That's just what he did. Doesn't matter why. No, wait a minute. If you think, why did he do that? There's a reason. No, I'm assuming there's a reason. There's no reason. He just determined he's going to build the universe in 7 days, but 7th day he's just going to rest. He's not going to do anything. So he built it in 6 days. It's just information. Just information. And then in Leviticus 23, he says, these are the appointed times. Well, for the Jews to have their holidays, feast days, whatever. Establish a culture. To establish a culture among the Jews, so when they go into the land of Canaan, they'll be separate, they'll be distinct, because they'll have different holidays, and there'll be weirdos and oddballs that they can't get along with their neighbors, and so that keeps them segregated. Okay. And then you've got this tabernacle, but the tabernacle, the tent covered thing that Moshe built in the wilderness, they carried around with them. But then David built the temple, and the temple's better because it's stately and it's made out of, marble and gold and, all that stuff. And then, so we're the temple, so forget the Mishkan. So what I'm saying is, why would I notice that the pattern, the thematic placement of pieces between the 7 days of creation, the 7 Moedim, and 7 articles of the Mishkan? In fact, I could count it in a way that there's more than 7, because what about the tent itself on the inside, besides the big white fence going around? And maybe it's not even white, and it's like, all I can tell you is, in talking with my brother in early 2004, he was going to do some missionary work in Nigeria, and the Nigerians didn't have a written language, and they were bringing with them the Jesus film, the book of Luke, put into this Azeri language, is my understanding of what was going on. But then they'd watch the film and they'd say, you want to ask Jesus in your heart and get eternal life? Sure. You want to have all your sins forgiven? Sure. You want to go to heaven when you die? Yeah, you betcha. Okay. Well, now what do we do? Go to church and read the Bible. There is no church. There is no Bible. There's no preacher. Well, now what do we do? Hey, look, we got to go to the next village. They go to the next village. Thousands of people would respond, same thing. Go to the next village, thousands of people would respond, same thing. No churches, no Bibles, no preachers. So I was like, what are you supposed to do now? Well, somebody's got to go to the city and learn how to read and get a Bible and come back and teach those guys, one of their own. And it's like, well, how many years is that going to take? Well, they finally ended up doing that. But the point is, I was talking to my brother and he says, it's a really big problem. And I said, well, it's actually Yahweh's problem. I mean, I've been going to this congregation for a couple of years now, 3 years. Torah study congregation, and I said, we got to just ask Yahweh to do something. I remember sitting in his car and saying, Yahweh, please give the Nigerians something. They don't read. They don't have a language. They can't put a translation of the Bible into their language because they don't have one. They can't read. Well, they ended up taking the language, giving it figures to write, then teaching people how to write. And my brother was telling me how this, when they finally then drove in with a truck full of these Bibles, only they weren't Bibles. I think it was just maybe the book of Luke. And they were handing them out to people who had just learned to read. This one lady got it and she was taking it with her and she was walking across the field. She opened it up and she just dropped to her knees with this book. His words in my language. She was so overwhelmed with appreciation, with a heart of worship. She couldn't take another step. And I said, that's what I feel to be able to understand Hebrew. Finally, his words, the pure truth. This is it. Astounding, remarkable, mind-blowing, life-changing, to realize no matter what we've been taught, no matter what history is said or not said or distorted, or to realize this is the pure truth. Well, the problem is, whatever language they came up with for the Nigerians, there's like 500 languages in that one country, and that they took one pretty common commercial trade language, Azeri, and then they put that in. Then they can only give them, what, 1 or 2 books? what are they giving them? Psalms and Luke? Or then they go, Wycliffe Bible translators go around to the world, and depending on how many people are in any group, maybe we'll give them one chapter, something. But they have to make these decisions. And I thought, within a week or two after that prayer, give the Nigerians something, I see this Mishkan pattern, and I tried to tell them, just give them these 7 pictures. It's all right there. What are you talking about? Yeah. How can the whole message be in 7 pictures? It's correlated, proven by the 7 days and the 7 Moedim. The 7 pieces of the Mishkan, those are the 7 pictures. And even for Yeshua to give us the Sermon on the Mount and lock the whole thing in, and then all the other places besides, but that pattern, there's something about that voice. And it was the truth. What I saw, other people don't believe it's the truth. It's like, well, so what? Why am I telling you this story? How do we know we're on the right page? How do we know we're doing the right thing? How does anybody know whether that translation that was put into Azeri from the book of Luke, or maybe it should have been King James, maybe just teach them English and let them learn the King James. That's the purest translation. Or maybe it's not King James. It should be maybe Greek or Latin, or maybe just even the rabbinical Talmudic understanding. Well, they wouldn't even look at the book of Luke. They'd look at, well, even giving them Deuteronomy, or just give them the whole Torah. What? And it's like, how do we know whether we have the truth? I can feel like I have the truth. I can feel like I'm worshiping Jesus on Christmas morning. How do I know that's not pagan? How do I know it's not exactly what Yahweh said not to do? And yet we're doing it, saying this is your worship. How do I know? It's your faith. According to your faith, so be it unto you. Yeah, but he said, don't learn the ways of the heathen, your neighbors who worship Elohim Achrim, and do it to me like you're worshiping me. Don't do that. Well, then what are we supposed to do? What did he give us? Well, he gave us Leviticus 23. He said, as a matter of fact, I'm placing the Sabbath day, and not just giving it to Israel, but the first week of creation, the 7th day. Well, he did nothing on that day, and now that's supposed to be something. No. He did something on the 7th day. The fact that it looks like he did nothing and that he rested on Shabbat is a really big deal. One time I was trying to record a bunch of stuff on a DVD recorder. Hours of recording onto this new disc, and then it's like, okay, we're done. You take it out, and I made a whole bunch of these things, and sent them to people. Nobody could play them, and I went back and looked at the instructions, and it's like, oh gosh darn it. This particular DVD recorder, you had to hit this button that said finalize. And if you don't hit the finalize button, it doesn't set it. And the whole thing is no good. All those hours and hours and hours and mailing off these things was for nothing because I didn't hit the finalize button. There's something about having to hit that last button which sets or causes to gel or causes to be readable everything else. And then I realized what a rotten experience that was. Waste of money, waste of time, waste of everything. And then I realized, hey, wait a minute, that's a picture of the Sabbath day. See, to rest on the Sabbath day isn't doing nothing. It's really doing something. You're just not doing your normal work. Oh, but you're doing something. And to me, this word rest was almost, again, caustic, jarring. Rest. Yeah. And it's like, I looked at rest as like sleep is a slice of death. Every day you're working, and then all of a sudden you're dead. And you wake, oh, another day. Let's get out there and just get stuff done. Rest. But when I realized I had to get a different frame of mind, what's Yahuwah's frame of mind? That rest is a really big deal of accomplishment. And I had no clue. I had no appreciation, no perspective. I didn't know. I was never given that by somebody else. And then, so to read in Leviticus 23, these are my appointed times. Oh, man, okay. But see, if you read in Hebrew, it doesn't say these are my appointed times. It says Mikra Kodesh, translated appointed times. But he says these are moedi, my, ends in the letter yod. These are my, and then the word moed means witness, testimony, choice best treasure, bejewelment, adornment, ornamentation. Yahweh's saying, I have adorned myself with these things to bear witness of my identity. How do we know the God we worship, the object of our deification, our celebration, our affection? How do we know that we're looking at the right one? Because remember, Yeshua said, he's going to say to a bunch of people the most horrible thing, depart from me, I never knew you, you workers of iniquity. And look at, what? Me? I cast out devils in your name. I worshiped in your name. I walked on water in your name and raised people from the dead and healed the sick in your name. I never knew you. That's the most horrible verse in the entire Bible. How do we know that the one we're worshiping and singing songs about and having affection for, how do we know that that one is the true creator of heaven and earth? Yahweh Zavot, Elohim of Israel. How do we know? He gave us identifying features. Leviticus 23. And with that, we should take a break because we're at the 1 hour mark.
No, actually, Eric, we are only on 46 minutes.
46, really? Because my thing says 102. Okay, then I'll wait for you to tell me. I'll continue.
Yes.
So if he's going to make a big deal about giving us, these are the things, these are the items, this is the, in Hebrew, the word is ayin dalet. Ayin dalet, ed. So the moed, mem vav, well, the mem is a prefix letter, meaning the time, the place, the object, the tool, the useful item, which, and as I said before, yods and vavs can be added between any other letters, almost like wild cards in a hand of playing poker, in a hand play of cards. Yods and vavs can be dropped in, taken out. Sometimes if you read the dictionary, it looks like it's changing the meaning of the word, but the more derivative spellings of any word you look at, you realize adding yods and vavs is like almost like verb tenses. It doesn't change the word itself. Not really. And as you start learning the language, you realize there are very simple ways of deciphering what this language is saying. Really some simple rules, but I've never heard people tell that. I just discovered that in terms of getting the Tanakh and just start reading. Read for yourself and see what it says. But the idea that he says, here are the things, that's the mem prefix, mem, these are the things which I have appointed for myself as my ornamentation, which will bear witness of my identity. So you'll know, no matter what happens, no matter where you go, no matter where the winds of time or space take you, this is a way of bringing it back to the one true reality, my moedi. So the yod is a suffix, which makes it personal. The mem is the prefix, which makes it the object of, for the consideration, for the use of. And then the ayin dalet is the word which means witness and testimony. So I can sit here and safely believe, because he said so right out of his own mouth. This chapter, Leviticus 23, he designed, he placed, he fixed into the universe somehow and gave it as a clear, simple revelation to his people, that he then says later, you alone, Israel, have I made myself known to, and that I've called my own people, and that I look at you as a separate, set apart, kadosh, segregated people of all the peoples on the face of the earth that I'm going to hold responsible, that I gave the truth to. And if you pollute the truth, then you're going to get it in big trouble for that distortion. And then I'm going to have to refine the truth in you, because it's in you, and you as a people, and you as an expression of culture. You have to be my pure tone truth expressed on the face of the earth as a people, as a culture, as a language, as a nation, exhibiting good, clean, accurate, right relationship with me, which is what yashar means. Straight, right, smooth, pleasant, agreeable, just right. Yashar. So then I had to sit there and think, well, don't the people who study the Bible know this? Well, then it turns out that almost everybody that I talk to who's ever been to seminary or Bible college, they don't study Hebrew, or they might take Hebrew for 1 hour, they said. Does that mean like 1 hour we'll talk about Hebrew, then spend the rest of the time in Greek, or they take a 1 hour class for one entire semester? Well, generally it's like, they'll mention Hebrew, it's like, yeah, that's not our gig. Greek, Latin, English. So if you read, these are my appointed times, yeah, the God of the Old Testament gave appointed times for the Jews that were wandering around in the desert, so to keep them separate from all the cultures of the people nearby. Okay, I get it. No, that's not what it says. That's the way it's interpreted. That's the way it's translated. But what he said was, I am who? He gave a name. Moshe, standing there at the burning bush in Exodus 3, says, people are going to say, oh, you talked to somebody, huh? You talked to a voice in a burning bush. Okay, Moshe. And what's his name? There's something about name. And he says, they're going to ask me, what's your name? What should I tell them? And then he says, tell him Ehie sent you. Ehie, Asher, Ehie. Tell him Ehie sent you. Oh, okay. Well, what's Ehie mean? And as I said before, in analyzing that sentence, it's like a dot, a line, and a dot. And you could say, what's the big deal? So what? Asher means straight line. It's a derivative spelling of Yishar, Yod Shin Resh. It's Aleph Shin Resh, means straight line. Okay. Just on a little aside, I saw something on the internet the other day. There's some guy, I don't know who he is, I can't remember his name, some Hollywood guy, and all of a sudden he found a certain type of geometric structure with 5 circles and 12 lines or something. Anyway, he thinks this is going to change physics for people's use. He took it to Uganda, and he wants to let them have it and teach it and this and that and the other thing. And just incredible realization, understanding of he says straight lines don't exist in nature. He says everything goes out as a sphere, as a circle, as a round thing, and like a dropping a pebble in a pond, it goes out in a circle, and once it hits the edge, it comes back in straight lines, and that's where you get these Pythagorean solids. And I heard him mention that, and he said there's no straight lines, and I thought Yahweh said his name, Ehie, Asher, Ehie. That Asher is a straight line. And if the guy that created the universe claims to be the straight line before creation, then for this guy to say there's no straight lines in nature, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, what's he talking about? He doesn't see something. Because if you saw that there's a straight line right there, Yahweh's middle name, if you say his name is Ehie, Asher, Ehie, that's a straight line. And I might say, well, that's just an interesting geometry, but I don't know what to do with it. Other than turn it into a little glyph of dot, line, dot, okay. Well, now all of a sudden, when I hear this guy saying, hey, there's no straight lines, and there's this thing that he's discovered, which is going to change the technology of the world, literally present tense, it's something happening. Suddenly, the great significance of this straight line being in Yahweh's name says, now, I don't know what to do with this, but there's something there. There's something. I don't know what, but there's something. See, so now I have to believe, well, what if Yahweh built? He told us to do stuff, and we don't know why. We just do it. And all of a sudden, we later find out, hey, there was a reason. Like he might say, okay, you guys don't eat pork. Oh, come on, man. Bacon is so good. With eggs, with potatoes on a cheeseburger? Come on. Sprinkled a little bit on top. It's like, hey, don't eat pork. There was a book I read I think the book was How the Irish Saved Civilization, talking about St. Patrick, and a certain thing happened where there had been some sort of devastation and everything was in ruins. 5 minutes. And these people that he happened to be with were starving, and they're saying, hey, why don't you pray to your God that he'll send us some food? There had been some kind of war or some kind of devastation, and there was no vegetation, no food, no nothing. Says, okay. And all of a sudden, in a little bit, a couple hours later or whatever, all of a sudden, there's this herd of pigs coming running through. It's like, whoa! And they grabbed a few to eat. And they said, we're impressed. When you prayed to your God, not only did he send food, he sent the best food, a herd of pigs for us to eat. Wow, this is incredible. The best food. Why would Yahweh provide in that case for St. Patrick and his companions at the occasion the best food when they were hungry, but yet tell his favorite people, don't eat it. You're not allowed to eat that food. It's not food. So when you get in the New Testament where it says, it's not what goes into your mouth, it pollutes you. It's what comes out of your mouth. That's what Jesus said. And so then there's this little verse that says, by saying this, he declared all foods clean. It's like, darn right, we can have all the bacon we want. We can eat ham on Christmas and Easter, and it's like, all food is clean. He told Israel to say, that's not food. Well, then who wrote this verse that says, by saying this, he declared all foods clean? That's almost like an editorial comment. Why would the writer stick that in? Yeshua didn't say it. But we have on record that Jesus is telling us that you can eat whatever you want. Well, as I start reading the Torah, and I realize that Yahuwah said to Israel, what is it, Leviticus 19 maybe is where it is? He said, or 13 maybe, he said, do not eat certain things. And he goes on to describe types of birds and types of fish and types of animals. And he said, because if you do, it'll abominate you. What does that mean, abominate you? Well, he then he says, if you commit certain sexual acts, it'll abominate you. And if you commit certain acts of sorcery and witchcraft and magic arts, that will abominate you. It's like, what does that mean, abominate you? Well, then I found that the word in Hebrew used for abomination also means lumpy, stupid, clogged. If your drains get clogged, you better call the plumber because everything's going to back up and you're going to get sewage. If your arteries clog, heart trouble, stroke, aneurysms, if your body systems start getting clogged, call it cancer. Yeah, like that. So if Yahuwah is telling his people, I built the world in such a way that everything functions, and I'm telling you, do not eat the pork, it'll be like a type of cancer. And you may not see it developing, you may not taste like it, but I'm telling you, do not eat it. I'll just say this one last thing, we'll take a break here. There's this little thing I heard about, recently disclosed. I heard about it 50 years ago. Let's just say it's called V2K. If anybody wants to look that up. The point is, they're using DNA as an antenna where they can read your mind, they can give you thoughts, they can look through your eyeballs and see what you're seeing and know what you're thinking, present tense. People that are scientists trying to develop this thing, have developed this thing. So the question is, I'm thinking, if our DNA is modified, is abominated by eating pork and shellfish and other things, might Yahweh have set up for such a time as this, when other people are going to be using these invasive weaponries against us, that he says, I'm telling you, my people, do not eat pork. Do not eat shellfish. If the fish doesn't have fins and scales, don't eat it. If the animal doesn't chew the cud and have cloven feet, don't eat it. Why? Don't even ask. Don't even bother asking why. Just do what I said, and it'll be well for you. Okay. Then for me to yield to his instruction puts me in a position of health and strength. And if I say, yeah, Jesus said I could eat whatever I want, then it's like, okay, then you're bringing it upon yourself. Why would he say that? Why would he say that? Why would Jesus be on record in the New Testament of saying something that looked so contradictory to what Yahweh told his people in the Old Testament? Why would Jesus have his Holy Spirit lead people to worship him on the sacred Sunday, and yet he told his Jewish people to keep the seventh day, what we might think of as Saturday, as being the holy day? Why would he do that? You got to take a break.
Oh, I'm on it.